The knocking started about a week ago. I had fallen asleep on the couch again, and it was so loud that I yelped as I jolted awake. I was disoriented, of course, caught off guard by both the rude awakening and the awkward position in which I had passed out. I started to stumble to the front door, both eyes still half closed, when the unusual hour registered to me. Who the hell would be at my door at this hour? I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and made my way to the vestibule. The small panes of frosted glass framing the front door usually let me know what to expect in terms of visitors, but I couldn't make anything out through the darkness. Whoever was there hadn't set off the motion sensor light, nor had they knocked again. I was only a moment away from dismissing it as a fabrication of my dreaming mind, when the knocking came again. It was loud and insistent, but it wasn't coming from the front door. The sound echoed through the house from the rear. The back door? That was even weirder. I couldn't tell if it started at the front and moved around the house, or if I'd been too surprised to note the direction of the sound when I awoke. Either way, it had definitely freaked me out. I was glad I had had the foresight to draw the sitting room blinds before I fell asleep. I didn't like the idea that whoever was knocking might have been able to spy me sleeping through the window. I made my way as silently as I could down the hall and into the kitchen, where I paused for a moment. The back door, which opened into my small backyard, was in the adjacent laundry room. My heart raced slightly, and my breaths were just a touch quicker than was comfortable. I couldn't deny that I was spooked. I tried to rationalize why someone might be knocking on my back door so late at night. I lived alone, and didn't have family in town. None of my friends tended towards mischievousness, or I might have suspected a prank, and I didn't know my neighbors. In my wildest anxieties, I could picture the cops showing up at my door to arrest me for some infraction I hadn't realized I'd committed. But surely they would come to the front door like any other polite visitor. All I could think was that it was some trick, a scam, a way to get me to open the door so I could be held at knife point and robbed. I crept towards the back door, trying to get as good a view as possible without exposing myself to the large window that made up most of the door's upper third. It was no use. Whoever was there, I couldn't see them. Just like in the front, the motion sensor lights hadn't activated. I took another heartbeat or two to muster my courage and then stepped right up to the back door. I could see, my eyes having adjusted by now to the darkness, that no one was there. The window revealed only the small, disheveled yard. Though it was in need of some minor groundskeeping, it harbored no uninvited guests. The knocks that came then made me jump nearly out of my skin. I barely avoided pissing myself. They hadn't come from the back door or the front. I could tell now from where I was standing that they were coming from the basement door. It was set into the wall on the far side of the kitchen, just a short distance away from where I stood. Someone was in my basement, knocking on the door. That door doesn't lock, and there was no way into the basement. Whoever was down there was already in my house. They must have broken in earlier and then waited. It felt like some kind of sick game. My blood froze. All I could hear was the echo of the knocks reverberating through my skull. I silently thanked God that I had fallen asleep on the couch, still fully clothed with my phone in my pocket. I wasted no time calling the police. The dispatcher had me make my way back to the front and outside, so I could meet the police as they arrived. The entire time I was on the line, only a handful of minutes, I was terrified that some axe-wielding maniac was about to come bursting through the door and disembowel me. What actually happened was almost worse. The cops found nothing. No sign of forced entry, nobody in the basement, no indication that what I had experienced had happened at all, other than my obvious cowering. The cops were sympathetic, if a little frustrated. They suggested that I had had a bad dream. If it happened again, they said, more condescendingly than I appreciated, I was welcome to call again. It did happen again, the following night. It had been a long day at work, and I was tired. My boss had been sympathetic at least, but it was obvious I was preoccupied and unfocused. She sent me home early that day. I crawled into bed only after I had checked all the locks, all the possible points of egress into my home, and then checked again to make sure they were secure. I even forced myself to head down into the basement just to prove to myself that no one was hiding there. The basement is small, one room, and mostly a featureless one at that. No windows, just a couple of shelves and a half a dozen or so boxes that I still haven't gotten around to unpacking. I even opened up the boxes just to make sure that the only things inside them were knickknacks and assorted junk. When I was satisfied with my search, I breathed a small sigh of relief. Not a psycho killer to be found. Despite that, I was uneasy still. There wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a sense that I wasn't welcome. I suppose it's not uncommon to be afraid of basements, but I had never felt like this before. I used to think it was juvenile. As I said, the knocking returned that night. I woke up much more composed than I had the night before. My phone and a mid-sized knife I had brought up from the kitchen lay in easy reach. Again, I called the police, and again they found nothing. I was left with a distinct impression that they would not welcome a third call. The knocking returned the following night, and the night after. I didn't call the police, and I didn't get out of bed. I just lay there and listened to it, timed the knocks. The earliest it started was 1:23 a.m., and the latest it ended was 4:11 a.m. Each set of knocks came sporadically, sometimes only 2 minutes between knocks, and sometimes as long as half an hour. If there was any kind of pattern to it, it eluded me. I changed tactics the following night. I needed to know that I wasn't imagining things. I asked a drinking buddy of mine, Connor, if he wouldn't mind staying over at my place for just one night. I told him what had been happening. I think he thought I was being silly, but he agreed. I had tried to communicate its importance without sounding desperate, or like I was losing my mind, but I doubt I succeeded. He showed up at my place just after sundown. I supplied pizza and beer, my part of the deal in disrupting his schedule. "So what exactly am I here for, man?" he asked as we ate. "You think there's someone hiding in your basement?" I let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know. I just keep hearing someone knock, and it's freaking me out. Honestly, I just hope it happens again while you're here, so I can prove to myself that I'm not completely insane." He laughed at that. "I think you're past the point of insanity, bud." I smiled, but I was nervous that nothing would happen, that him being here would prove nothing. He slept on the couch that night at my request. It was closer to the basement door, and I wanted to make sure he could hear the knocks. When they were sounded through my home that night, as aggressive and insistent as ever, I leapt from my bed and rushed downstairs, nearly tripping over myself in the process. I was stunned to find Connor sleeping peacefully on the couch, blissfully unaware. "Wake up!" I nearly shouted as I shook his shoulders. His eyes snapped open and his face twisted with shock. "What? Jesus Christ, man, you scared me." He sat up and shook his head a little, evidently trying to recover from the heart attack I'd almost given him. "Did you hear it?" I could tell from the look on his face that he hadn't. I felt wild, coursing with adrenaline. "It's fine. It always happens more than once." Connor was not happy about it, but we sat there on the couch in near total silence for an hour, and then another. His patience dwindled. "Listen," he said. "You know I work at 8 a.m. I can't stay up all night. I'm sorry, but I didn't hear anything." His voice was calm, but the effort involved in maintaining it that way was palpable. I left him, both of us frustrated, and returned to my bed. The knocks continued a short time later. He didn't mention them before he left in the morning. I was desperate. I felt hounded in my own home, like a rabbit cowering in its burrow as a wolf stalks outside. Except my wolf was inside my burrow. I could sense its presence in the air, dripping eager saliva, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I had to face it, to put a stop to it. I didn't know what else to do. The knocking and the attendant anxiety kept me up at night and ruined my days. I felt like a crazy person, fraught and irrational. I could stay in a hotel for a few nights, or maybe couch surf for a while, but my savings would only last so long, and both of those solutions could only ever be temporary. I could move, sell my house, and go elsewhere, but what if the knocking followed me? I don't think I could take that. The next night, I camped outside the basement door, clutching the kitchen knife, waiting for the knocking to start. I didn't have to wait long. The second the first knock shook the door, I lunged for the knob and wrenched it open. The solitary knock echoed in my mind, but behind the door was only silence and darkness. I gazed down the basement stairs. I knew I would have to descend. I moved gingerly, knife and phone light held out in front of me, down the steps and into the small cement room. "Who are you?" I yelled, swinging the knife and the light around wildly, desperately trying to pin down my harasser. "Leave me alone!" I stayed down there for what must have been an hour, heart pounding and blood rushing, slashing at shadows. Eventually, exhausted and as terrified as ever, I had to admit that there was nothing here. I'm losing my damn mind. I'd taken one step up the stairs when my blood turned to ice. The basement door was closed. I was sure I had left it open when I came down. To mitigate the sense of claustrophobia, I ascended on tiptoe, forcing myself to take steady breaths. The knob didn't budge. The door wouldn't open. I couldn't understand why. There was no lock on this door, no latch, no other means of barring it shut. I thought, hoped even, for a moment, that perhaps something heavy had been placed in front of it, but I could see well enough through the door's undercut into the kitchen. I've tried to shoulder the door down. I've stabbed at it with a knife, tried to bash off the knob. Nothing has worked, not even a scratch on the white wood. I've tried the police again, but my call wouldn't go through. I've tried texting Connor, my boss, anyone who might be able to help me, but they've all gone undelivered. It's been hours. All I can do now is pound on the basement door, scream for help, and hope somebody comes to let me out. I've written this as a last-ditch effort. I'm going to try and post it anywhere I can. My internet is barely functioning, not well enough for the messaging apps. My phone is at 6%. I don't have any food or water. If you can read this, please let me out.